Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're going to be doing part 22 of our Jurassic World Evolution Accurate Dinosaur mod collection. We take a look at a bunch of different cool different animals that people have been making and compare them to their real-life fossil counterparts. So yeah, we've got a couple very interesting animals today. We got a modern animal coming, we got a couple really cool Permian animals, and a mix of other cool animals coming in. So that's always going to be exciting. And yeah, I'm got up to about part 28 of this, so I want to get this out before the release of Jurassic World Evolution 2. So hopefully we can get all these pieces out, or all these parts for Jurassic World Evolution out, the mod collection before we get the second one come out. So enough babbling. We're going to be starting off with our first animal here today. We got a cool little ceratopsian we've probably had on here before. But this is another version made by Dalbeni, I believe how you pronounce that, and it's Zuniceratops. So let's keep going. This wonderful little man. So, Zuniceratops is a really cool little ceratopsian. He comes from... His name means Zuni horn face. Is a ceratopsian from the mid-Tenorian of the late Cretaceous, of what is now New Mexico. So it's found in the middle of the United States, pretty much. Yeah, really cool. So this lived about 10 million years earlier than the more familiar like ceratopsians with the big brow horns and all that. So your big things like Triceratops, Torosaurus, things like that. Very interesting window into their evolution. So this gives a really important window. So these guys measured about 2.2 meters long, or about 7 feet 2 inches long. 2 inches, 2 feet. And probably weighed about 175 kilograms, or 386 pounds. So the size of like a large pig or a tiger. I think that might be a good comparison, a large tiger. So it's substantially smaller than most of these giant elephant or buffalo-sized ceratopsians you normally think of, but this is an early relative. This was just before they started to get really large. So the skull, you can see, it bears a whole well-developed brow horn, similar to those of other chasmosaurians and similar primitive centrosaurs, but there is no nose horn, so that really tells you something interesting. And you can see it's got this really thin, broad shield-like structure that has... looks much more primitive than other ceratopsids, like the later ceratopsians such as Torosaurus, Triceratops, and Pachyrhinosaurus, for example. But these guys have a larger frill that's less derived than those, but looks more like much more advanced than something, or much more derived than Protoceratops, so a really early relative. This is when they just started to get big horns and such. So the really cool story about this guy was discovered in 1996, and was by Christopher James Wolfe, which is the son of the paleontologist Douglas G. Wolfe, on the Merino Hill Formation in the west central North Mexico, where one skull and the bones of several individuals have been found. And more recently, one bone was found... being believed to be a squamosal, had been found to be an ischium from an Orantinosaurus, which is a therizinosaur that lived in the same sort of environment as these guys. So what really makes Zuniceratops interesting is that it seems to be a transitional form. So it seems to be kind of in that line of where you see these really small, like Protoceratops, Aquilops, those really small ceratopsians or ceratopsids. Well, they're technically ceratopsians. Ceratops is referred to a later group. And then you see this is on the path of the evolution. This is going from the small, meager beginnings. And this is like on the way. Early relatives, they're just starting to get a bit bigger. They're getting their horns, are developing their frills. And then you see, as it goes further on, you get to the animals that are more familiar to us. So eventually we get like Centrosaurus, we get Triceratops, and a lot of those animals like that. And... what's very interesting, this actually supports the idea that ceratopsians may have come from North America and spread into Asia, but it's kind of neither here nor there. It supports the theory, but there's some evidence to support it, but it's just we don't really have the fossils. Although the first specimens discovered have single rooted teeth, so which is weird. The later fossils have double rowed teeth. This is evidence that the teeth become double rowed with age. So that's what will happen. And these guys, like other ceratopsians, were herbivorous and were probably a herd animal, but we can't really tell that much about their behavior. Potentially could have lived in like a tapir, like living on its own in the dense forests, or we really just don't know that much about behavior to assume, but we know that there are large death assemblages of some ceratopsians, especially things like Centrosaurus, so that's another cool thing. But yeah, really, really awesome little guy. So now we're going to move on to another really interesting animal that was done by Dombey. Next animal we got here is an ichthyotaxa, which means it's only described from footprints. But is what it does tell us is very interesting. So yeah, let's release this guy. That's a really nice I think we'll have a look at him while he's looking there. Maybe we'll... So here's a wonderful look at this guy. This is Eosuropus. So Eosuropus, as I mentioned, is an ichthyotaxa, which means it is described only from footprints. There's no bones or eggs or anything that can be attributed to the remains of, obviously, the footprints, because there's no bones in footprints, unless the animal died, like, in the footprint somehow. But it does tell us a little bit about what the world was like during the Middle Jurassic. So this guy has been found around North America, Italy, and the UK. So lived in very northern areas. So yeah, like very north. So North America, Italy, and the UK. So in Europe and America. Or North America. I don't want to say United States of America. But anyway, what's really interesting is that these guys, there's not very much known, but it showed that these guys walked on their front feet and their hind legs, and were assumed to be herbivorous because they're relatives. But what makes this extra interesting is this is the first early documented sauropodomorph footprints. So this is like the first of the sauropodomorphs. So this would be the line that would go from animals like Plateosaurus and eventually lead to Diplodocids and Brachiosaurids, and then eventually to the giant dinosaurs such as Orantinosaurus. So this is a really interesting animal. It gives us, so we know that in the Middle Jurassic there were animals like these around. We don't necessarily have the fossils, so like bones or coprolites or anything, but I think it's still interesting regardless, because you can still learn a lot from these footprints. You can learn about how animals walked. Obviously we don't really have any bone remains of prosauropods like this from the late Jurassic, the Middle Jurassic. So it does tell us a lot of what was sort of living at the time. It does, even though it isn't as informative as, let's say, bones and stuff, it can tell us a lot about dinosaurs and how they, what environments they were living in, also what animals were living in that environment as well. So I think that's still interesting regardless. And I think it's also a really good opportunity to experiment with some anatomy. You can pretty much create your own spec animal, pretty much. And I really like how this came out. I really like that long neck. I like these claws he's got here. Very prosauropod. Prosauropod's kind of the outdated term. It's sauropodomorph. So it really does look like something kind of like Plateosaurus or something a bit earlier. Really awesome animal. I think they did a good job. So we'll watch it eat. And look at the Zuni. I like Zuni. They're a very cute boy. I really like the colours on that. I think it really does fit. Same on this guy as well. The banding on the tail always looks nice. Nothing wrong with the subtle brown. So that was done by Sweetener and part of the Polar Bundle, just in case I forgot to mention. But yeah, I think came out really well. The next animal in the bundle is a little bit more information, because this guy is only just from footprints. Still a really interesting animal regardless. So I'm really excited to show off the next one. So we'll let them have their feed, and then we will show off the next guy. And I love this guy. We've got Cryolophosaurus, and we'll just have to wait. I'll just show you how silly it looks. Look at this beautiful man. Look at the size of him. We'll have to wait for him to get to his drink. I think he wants to go for his drink. And I'll have to show you how silly he looks. I love this guy. One of my favorites. And a really interesting animal from the Permian. So we get a little bit of representation from the Paleozoic. There we are, look at this wonderful man. So this is Cryolophosaurus, which is a synapsid, which means it's got like one hole in its head. It's the big group that includes mammals and their relatives, so animals like Dimetrodon are considered synapsids. So these were very large synapsids. I believe one species was the largest like Palacosaur or one of those really early relatives known. So these guys are found in the southern part of what is North America during the early Permian. So a really early guy. So these are the best known members of the clade Cassiidae, where there's other relatives, and is usually considered the largest terrestrial vertebrate of the early Permian. So there is a few different species. The smallest species only grew to about lengths of, like C. romi, grew to lengths of about 4.5 to 4.8 meters, or 14 to 15 feet, while the larger species, C. hancocki, is stretched out at about 6 meters long, or 20 feet long, which made it one of the largest synapsids of the early Permian. So one of the really, really weird things about this guy is he's got a tiny, tiny head, and we have no idea how that works. It's got very large openings, but also very, very small. But also he's got this massive shoulder joints and all that. It's believed that it would have been kind of very similar. They're believed to be herbivorous, similar to like things like especially their teeth. It shows they're very similar to things like iguanas. So the most likely would have been the big herbivores of the early Permian. And there's also evidence that shows that this guy had a diaphragm. But unlike modern mammals, that was probably weak and needed support from other muscle groups. And that is a deficit exacerbated by its aquatic habits. So that's a little thing we'll get into. So we obviously see its very tiny head, but there was a paper that came out a while ago that I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe 2020 or 2019, that suggests that Cryolophosaurus and its relatives were semi-aquatic, so they did live in. Well, the paper suggests that they lived in areas that were like swamps, and they were kind of like feeding on aquatic vegetation, almost like a weird hippo thing, even though they do look weird as they are. But there is mixed, conflicting evidence in that regard. Still really cool animal regardless. You can see they're quite charismatic because they have these massive bodies, just bulky boys, and these really, really tiny pinheads, which makes them look very, very goofy, but also very, very charismatic. I think they are awesome. So there's also evidence that suggests that they kind of had, we mentioned large humerus, and they also had features of the hand also support the idea that they were paddle shape in structure and structure. So they were like a paddle, and they were used to swim similar in matter like modern turtles. So there is evidence to suggest that there is evidence that isn't conducive of that, but I think it's still really cool. Would have probably been maybe a good burrower, but I think it's still a really interesting animal regardless. And a lot of people are like, why is its head so small? And it's really contrasted by this huge shoulder girdle. So it's like a really, really round body, long tail. You're very enormous, but these tiny, tiny heads. But yeah, I think it's still really, really awesome. How can you not love these guys? Love the animals. So this was done by Jasurbia. Just in case I forgot to mention that, Jasurbia, who does a lot of these really funky mods, which I love. And speaking of him, he's going to be doing the next mod that we've got going. So we're going from the Permian, or the early Permian, all the way to the Holocene with these two animals here. So we're going to be starting off. This one was also done by Jasurba. We have got the giant moa. So watch him, he's probably going to go for food. Look at this little man go. So there's two species of giant moas, so that's the name itself can be a little bit confusing. But judging by the head of this guy, I believe it's the South Island giant moa, which is the largest of the two species. And the main difference is that the South Island one is slightly larger, and the skull of the South Island giant moa has much more of a downward turn like that. See, I don't know why if he's going for food. But yeah, look at this silly man. He's going for food. I thought he took his time, but we'll just... stop and keep pose. So yeah, really, really wonderful guy here. I really love how it came out on the model. I think he looks kind of goofy but funny. Obviously this guy would have had feathers, like most birds do, pretty much all birds do, but kind of hard to render on that. But this is Dionis robustus, which was a member of the family Dionothiformes, which includes all 9 species of moa that are found only in New Zealand. So another really interesting about these moas as well is that they had a sternum without a keel, and they have a distinctive palate that makes them a paleognath, but they also have no wings at all. They have no arms. So basically they're the only, I believe, the only vertebrate that lost their back legs but not their front legs. So really, really interesting. But the moa family was quite diverse, but with the South Island giant moa, it was the largest. Adults stood at about 2 meters or 6'6" high at the shoulder or at the back at their highest point. So still very large, but they, if they raised up, which is evidenced by some cave paintings, even though this would be their natural posture, it's believed that they would be about 3.6 meters tall, or about 11 feet 10 inches. So that would make them the tallest bird species, but not the heaviest. Weight estimates for these guys range around 200 to 250 kilograms, maybe even potentially a little bigger than that. So a really, really large bird, about twice the size as an ostrich. And what's really only cool about this guy is that we know it's sort of its ecology. We know that it lived in very generalist. A lot of the other species of moa were very, very specialized to certain habitats across New Zealand. So like grasslands, forests, things like that. But it seems like alpine as well. But these guys seem to be the most generalist of them all, living in kind of all of these areas, but were comparatively very rare. So we also know a lot about... these guys, they have pretty large eggs. They have some of the largest eggs of birds. Not comparable to things like an elephant bird, but still really large regardless. And we know that comparatively, for size, they had very, very thin shells. And that may have led to the extreme sexual dimorphism that they had, with the males being about probably half the size and like a third of weight of the females, because... Or this is the hypothesis that because they are the ones that raise the babies, as you see it in kiwis and other paleognaths. They would be the ones raising the babies, so they would have to sit on the nests and make sure if they got too big, they would pretty much get crushed. And the females would compete for the attention of the males, which is pretty interesting. And the egg itself is 240 millimeters in length and 178 in width, which is the largest moa egg found. Very, very large egg. And being the South Island giant moa, they only lived in the South Island of New Zealand, which had all sorts of varied habitats like lowlands, forests, dunelands, also alpine areas, since there's the huge Southern Alps going across there. And the story of these guys is very sad. They lived in New Zealand. They only recently went extinct in the past few hundred years because of human hunting. They were very, very slow breeders, so they weren't able to compete with the Māori coming in and hunting them. So they just couldn't handle it because they couldn't handle the predation. Though their natural predators did include the Haast eagle and potentially things like adsbills, which are these like giant wekas, basically that's comparatively, that probably potentially ate young moa. Yeah, still a really interesting animal. How can you not love a good moa? I like how even it looks funky, but it looks funky but looks good at the same time. I think it's kind of goofy, but I love it. Just moas are really interesting animals. Like they took the niche of the large mammals of other places because New Zealand was isolated since the Cretaceous. Really, really interesting. So speaking of large mammals, we have got this. Oh, that was done by Joseba as well. Joseba. Yeah, I believe Joseba might be the better pronunciation. But this mod here was made by Leaf and Sweetener. Obviously a port from Planet Zoo. We have got the African bush elephant. So let's see how he goes. He's probably going to go for a run. Well, no, he is not. Let's just stop him there. So this is the African bush elephant, one of the two species of African elephant, with the African forest elephant living in Central Africa. So these guys are the largest and heaviest living land mammal, or land animal on Earth alive today, with a maximum recorded shoulder height of about 13 feet tall, or 3.96 meters. You could round it up to 4, and estimated about 10.4 tons, or 11.5 short tons. But this is an extreme individual. On average, the males would have got about 3.20 meters, or 10 feet 5 inches, at the shoulder, and weighed about 6 tons, or 6.6 short tons in weight, with females being comparatively much smaller. So they also are quite charismatic because they have these huge ears. One of the common ways to tell African and Asian elephants apart is that the African elephant has ears shaped like Africa, and the Indian elephant has ears shaped like India, which is a very cool thing, but still cool. Also, like, has the lesser domed back of the... That's kind of that, like that concave back. Really, really interesting. Also, generally larger tusks. And they have these large tusks. They don't really necessarily use them for defense. They kind of use them for digging and things. You do see tuskless elephants, especially today with poaching. And another thing that's very charismatic about them is their very, very prehensile trunk that they use to pretty much carry anything. They can use to carry and manipulate. They can pick up flowers and coins with their fingertips. So they're very, very good at manipulating objects with their trunk. So it's basically their nose and their hand all in one. So these guys are found all across sub-Saharan Africa, including places like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia, and Angola. And potentially even lived up in North Africa, with a subspecies that may have lived up there, or just the population. So as famous as other elephants, they're very, very social. Females will live in these matriarchal herds that is led by the oldest female, while the males either live in small bachelor groups or by themselves. And they are obviously very big and herbivorous, so because their diet consists mostly of grasses, creepers, and herbs, and can consume up to 150 kilograms or 330 pounds of food a day. That includes all sorts of different herbs and grasses and things, pretty much whatever they can find. And to supplement this diet, they will find mineral licks and termite mounds and salt licks where they will find all these extra minerals. And these guys have a very, very long breeding cycle. So bulls will start producing sperm when they're about 15 years old, and females will start ovulating at 11 years old. So they are in estrus about 2 to 6 days, and what happens is the bulls go into must, which is a period where you see like a substance going down into their mouths. They get extremely aggressive. So it just depends on how big and aggressive. The biggest and aggressive male gets to mate with the females. And gestation is forever for these guys. Elephants gestate for about 22 months, so that's almost 2 years. And the in-between birth period is 3 to 4 years, 3.9 to 4.7 years, even 5 years in some. And really interestingly is that the babies are born at about 100 to 120 kilograms, or 220 to 260 pounds, and they gain about 1 pound a day. And the cows will lactate for about 4.8 years, where the calves will drink exclusively their mother's milk for 3 months, and then they start independently learning. They spend their time feeding on plants. They learn how to use their trunk. They kind of just learn the social things. They learn how to be an elephant. And they stop doing that about 2 years old. But at the first 3 years of age, the male calves will spend more time suckling and growing faster than the females. And the maximum lifespan for these guys, African bush elephant, is about 70, 75 years. The generation length about 25 years. So when the males also become about 15 years old, they become teenagers. They become too big and rowdy for the females to handle. They get kicked out, and he'll go find a large male to kind of guide him. And that's actually a very interesting thing about elephants, is that the large males kind of regulate the younger males so they don't get so aggressive, and they basically just suppress that activity. They're kind of like the wise bulls that teach them how to be good bulls and things like that. That's really interesting. And they don't face too many threats. They will get hunted. Subadults will get hunted by lions. Generally, they're not very hunted by their predators, such lions and stuff. But the major issues for these guys is poaching, which has been a big issue for decades, where people have been hunting them for their tusks because people like to carve them, and it's like a decorative item. But also things like climate change and habitat change from agriculture, cleaning out most of the habitat because they're big animals. They live in large groups. They need lots and lots of habitat to sustain themselves. But the issue is that as well, agriculture, people want to farm, and just wipes that all out. But luckily, they are considered endangered. They were actually recently just considered endangered by the IUCN. So hopefully some better protections are put in place. But they are generally kind of really revered. The population in the wild is estimated to be about 400,000. I think it's the maximum estimate. Which luckily they live in about 30% of their habitat's protected. We could probably get that up to 50, hopefully. But yeah, very, very interesting animals. Obviously, a lot of people have an interest in elephants, so they're very charismatic, being so much like us and also so huge. Kind of the same draw of whales. But yeah, hopefully we protect them. Yeah, really, really wonderful animal. How can you not love a good elephant? And I think it fits so well in Jurassic World Evolution. Even it kind of reminds me of the mammoth, the Columbian mammoth mod. It still fits quite well. Really, really awesome. So that was by Leaf and Sweetener, and now we're going to be moving on to the next animal. So this one was just done by Sweetener, as I mentioned. This is going to be part of the polar pack. We've got Pyruvate. So let's get this guy going. So what is Pyruvate? His name means powerful warrior. Very interesting. And it's a genus of para-avian. So this is a relative of... so it isn't quite a bird, but it's a relative of birds. It's the kind of the grouping. It's a close relative of birds. from the Maastrichtian age, so that's right at the end of the late Cretaceous, before the Great Extinction, and lived in Antarctica, so it makes sense why it's a polar species. It comes from the Snow Hill Formation and is doesn't really have the sickle claw that's very charismatic of these dromaeosaurs, but seems to be a dromaeosaur regardless. But in 2019, it was actually suggested that this guy got pretty big as well, about the size of Utahraptor. So, as I mentioned, the only described species is from a single specimen, which is just a foot. So, really, anything you can kind of come up with your own, but is considered a dromaeosaurid. So, but it lacked most of these characteristics, but is believed to just be a para-avian because you can't really tell enough from just that foot to really tell if it's a dromaeosaur or whatever. But it's believed that this guy, since the holotype measures about 4.5 centimeters in length, the estimated length is about 3 to 4 meters, using related species such as Utahraptor. And it shows that this guy experienced gigantism, which is a trait not often seen in para-avians, but is best documented in things like Utahraptor, Ostroraptor, Deinonychus, and Dakotaraptor. So despite the prior assignment to Dromaeosauridae, it is believed to have been assigned to the class Paraaves due to the certain characteristics that differ from dromaeosaurs, as I mentioned, the sickle claw, but a few other things. And it's very likely this would have had some sort of feathered covering, but obviously we can't really do that in Jurassic World evolution. But it's also safe to assume that this guy was carnivorous, so feeding on whatever prey it can find. But also as well, at the time it lived, Antarctica didn't really have ice. It was much warmer and humid than it is today. It had like conifer forests, cycads and ginkgos all over Antarctica. So they still would have had darker winters, so there would have been periods like almost days without light. So that's just be part of living at the poles. But the Snow Hill Formation is a very interesting formation. There's a few animals that lived with it. I wanted to show this one off today, but the mod was crashing for me, so I couldn't really show it off. But we have Arcticopelta. We also have a bunch of different ornithopods, like Morosaurus and Tenosauria. And also sharks, and also pterosaurs, some titanosaurs, and elasmosaurs. So it was a very, very diverse formation. Just seeing not many things are named. Yeah, really wonderful animal here. Very interesting para-avian. I like that word, para-avian. It was described in 2000. Was it described in 2019? Found in 2003. That's when it got its name, but yeah, really, really wonderful. So now we're going to move on to an animal we saw last week, but this was done by Daboni, or I believe it's Dalbany. I'll say Dalbany. I think I'll just stick with that. But I think this is a really nice rendition of Cryolophosaurus. So I'm not going to go too much over this guy compared to, I think it's going to go around the other way, but let's just stop him where he is. So we already went over this guy last week. So this is a early Titanuran theropod, so believed to be related to things like Dilophosaurus and things. Really, really early. So there's only one species, Cryolophosaurus alatoni, which was found in the early Jurassic of Antarctica. And these guys got pretty large. They're believed to be about 6.5 meters or 21.3 feet and 465 kilograms, or a little over 1,000 pounds, which made it one of the largest theropods at the time. And it's believed to be even larger because the individual known is potentially subadult. And it's known from a skull, a femur, and other materials. And was believed to be a Dilophosaurid or Neotheropod outside, but considering that its kind of taxonomy's kind of jumped around as well, it's been considered a Titanuran, it's been considered an Abelisaur, a Ceratosaur, and an Allosaur. Just depends how it goes. And another really interesting about this guy, which kind of gives it its name, Alatoni, is this cool crest it's got here. It looks really funky. It's named because of Elvis Presley. It's got that Elvis Presley hair, and it's believed that this would have been used for interspecies displays. So something like a peacock's tail is a good example. It'd be used potentially to compete for mates or just signal to each other. And because it doesn't really, it's based on the bone, it doesn't really seem to be particularly hard or anything. And the brain of Cryolophosaurus seems to be pretty primitive compared to, or not necessarily primitive, but basal than other theropods. So this guy was first excavated from the Hansen Formation by Dr. William Hammer in 1991, and was the first carnivorous dinosaur to be discovered from Antarctica, and the first non-avian dinosaur from the continent to be named, and is found from rocks that date to about 194 to 188 million years ago, which symbolize the early Jurassic period. And yeah, what's really interesting about this animal is also its really cool habitat it lived with, animals it lived with. So it lived in this, as I mentioned, Antarctica at the time. It had no ice. Even between that time, between the early Jurassic and the Maastrichtian, or the late Cretaceous, there wasn't really much ice in Antarctica. So there would have been tropical not tropical, but conifer forests that were more temperate and could support a lot of different dinosaurs. So also this guy lived in a very interesting formation. You see the early animals such as Eosuropus, which was a very large basal sauropodomorph that became the sauropods that we know and love, big boys like Orantinosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus. And there was also a bunch of different animals that lived with, such as a crow-sized pterosaur, which was believed to be a dimorphodontid. Also some synapsids, such as trilodonts, which is interesting. Herbivorous synapsids, which is interesting, and two other unnamed sauropodomorphs, which is also pretty interesting. So it tells you a lot about the habitat. Really cool little fella. Well, not little fella, he's like almost 7 meters long. Huge boy. So now that was done by Dalbini. Well, I didn't even pronounce that right. You guys have funky names. But now we're going to move on. This one was done by Lattice and Tiny Gamer 2003. We have got Irritator. Oh, didn't go. So this guy is from Brazil during the Albian stage of the early Cretaceous, so about 110 million years ago this guy lived, and is found from a nearly complete skull in the Romaldo Formation in the Arapami Basin, I believe how you pronounce that. Let's get this guy fishing. You don't often get to see these guys fishing. So let's have a look at this wonderful guy. So this is Irritator. So this really funny name, the name Irritator challengei, comes from the word irritation, because the paleontologist who found the skull had been heavily damaged by the collectors, so they were very irritated, hence the name Irritator. And the species name is also a homage to the fictional character Professor Challenger from the Arthur Conan Doyle novels, so The Lost World and things like that. That's what he wrote. So this guy is also pretty big, estimated to be about 6 to 8 meters long, or about 20 to 26 feet. Irritator weighed about a ton, and made it actually one of the smallest spinosaurids known. Still a large animal regardless. And had this very, very shallow and slender snout, which was lined by these conical teeth like other spinosaurids. And also along ahead it had a small sagittal crest that you can see there, with powerful neck muscles that were anchored in here because they were most likely eating a lot of fish. And also it's believed to be a subadult, and also the most completely preserved Spinosaurid skull he has found. And there is a bit of a controversy considering that there's another animal that's called Agratruma or Lamire, which is described from a snout tip that was found in 1996, is believed to be a junior synonym of Irritator. So it's believed to be kind of either the same thing, or it's controversial at the moment, or just both these animals hail from the same stratigraphic units, so it's potential that they'd either live together, even if they were the same thing or not. And there's kinds of doubts on that, but it's still really cool regardless. And what's very interesting that this guy was also mistakenly identified as a pterosaur and later a Maniraptoran dinosaur. So that would be like something like a dromaeosaur. But in 1996, it was identified as a Spinosaurid theropod, and the holotype skull was prepared and redescribed in 2002. And both of these two species, two genera, belong in the Spinosauridae family, and it's believed to have a very generous diet, like that of today's crocodilians. So it may have preyed on fish and other small animals it could catch. Most animals are very generalist. Also, there's fossil evidence is known that an individual that ate a pterosaur by either hunting or scavenging it. Most animals won't take a free meal up, but they may have just generally eaten things smaller than them. They seem to be adapted for eating fish. And it's believed these guys may have also been semi-aquatic, just considering what we know of Spinosaurus. And inhabited a tropical lagoon, a coastal lagoon surrounded by dry regions, and coexisted with a bunch of different animals such as crocodiliforms and a large number of fish and pterosaurs. So a very, very productive formation, but a really cool animal regardless. As I mentioned, they got about 7.5 meters in a ton, so pretty big. Yeah, there's a lot of information, especially with a controversy about it being Amagama. I believe you pronounced that. But yeah, still really wonderful regardless. Let's see, we're going to move on to the next animal. So last but most definitely not least, we're going back to the Permian. This was done by Serber again. We have got a really cool animal that I love. We've got Orantinosaurus. Orantinosaurus. So let's see this guy run. Really, really interesting animal. So this is another synapsid. Is a very large carnivorous one this time, and its name means Antios reptile, and it's technically not really a reptile. This is a synapsid. So this is a group called a dinocephalian, which is a group of large synapsids or therapsids. So these were early relatives of like mammals and things. Let's stop. Early relatives of mammals, so what people would normally call mammal-like reptiles, but that's not really the correct term. Still a really, really wonderful animal. So these guys lived about 270 to 260 million years ago, and their relatives went extinct without descendants in the end of the Permian extinction, which was the biggest extinction in Earth's history. So another interesting thing about this guy is that paleontologists once assumed that this guy hunted like a crocodile, pulling land animals into the water, but they also pointed out it has a very weak tail and sprawling legs as kind of proof of this lifestyle. But it turns out in 2021 they examined the brain, which suggests it was largely terrestrial, so it seemed to be very well adapted for living and hunting on land. So it had highly advanced senses for vision, balance, and coordination, and was also very fast and would have been able to outrun competitors and prey alike. And another interesting thing as well is that these guys was potentially adapted for headbutting and for probably hunting as well. So these guys have a tall, narrow skull, which is about 80 centimeters long and is perhaps the largest known carnivorous non-mammalian synapsid. So very, very big. They would have got to about 5 to 6 meters or 16 to 20 feet long and about 500 to 600 kilograms or 1,100 to 1,300 pounds. So another interesting thing about this teeth, they don't have like dinosaur teeth where it's just kind of one. They have sort of like a canine, and they have all sorts of different sizes and things that kind of gives them a way of synapsids. They also got canine teeth and things like that, which is pretty interesting. It is related to animals. It's in the group Antiosauridae, so it's related to things like Titanophonius, is another big animal. But what's really interesting about this guy is its ecology. So this guy would have been a very large predator and lived in Russia. So they thought they were kind of swimming around like crocodiles, but Turns out not so. And we can see by the thickened skull roof and all that, it's believed that these guys would have been able to do quite well headbutting, and they would have, and these seem to be typical of Dinocephalians. And what really helps solidify that they were terrestrial is that all headbutters, including Titanotheres, goats, and Pachycephalosaurus, are all completely terrestrial. Though it's believed it could spend its time on land, but in water, but during the mating season, whatever that. But yeah, it's kind of airy-fairy to try and justify that. It's best to assume that it's kind of a predator. It's the lion of the late Permian, the lion. So there was an in-depth study that I mentioned before in 2011 that proves the idea that this was a sluggish crocodilian-like predator. It shows that they were fast, agile animals in spite of their great size, and its inner ear was larger than most of its closest relatives and competitors. So it was very well suited to be an apex predator in its ecosystem. So it would be able to hunt and run around quite effectively, and it was also probably one of the largest animals in the ecosystem. So it would have been a very great predator. So it would have been well adapted to run around and swift, attack fast, ambush prey, probably even headbutt them, try and knock them over. But you can see, as I mentioned here, with the headbutting, you can see a lot of this bone thickened skull happened. So a lot of thickening of the skull, which allowed them to be adaptation for headbutting, which you also see in other Dinocephalians, such as Monstrops. But it's probably not as contest, but these guys could have been taking part in pushing contests to try and push each other around and try and prove that they're the biggest hot shot, the biggest, toughest male. Still really, really interesting animals, and I think they're really wonderful. And they got pretty huge too. I think a lot of these animals really deserve the recognition. You can see, as I go on my tirade, you can see the different teeth there. You can see the canines and the molars and things. So you can see that's very characteristically mammalian, or synapsid. But yeah, it's very possible these guys would have kind of done rutting, similar to deer or goats, or some headbutting and pushing into each other for interest-specific combat for males, for mates. But potentially could have used it for hunting prey to try and knock something over, especially with all the animals being low slung and things in its habitat. But yeah, really, really wonderful animal, and I love how it's rendered. I think I just love Eosuropus. It's really awesome, and we get some more Permian animals in the spotlight. So yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified when I upload anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.